Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Chapter 29. Prachina Barhiruvacha Bhagavamste vachosmabhir na samyaghavagamyate kavayastadvijananti navayam karma mohitaha. King Prachina Barhi replied, My dear Lord, you could not appreciate completely the purport of your allegorical story of King Puranjana. Actually, those who are present in the spiritual knowledge can understand, but for us, we are overly attached to fruitive activities. To realize the purpose of your story is very difficult. But for us who are overly attached to the fruitive activities, to realize the purpose of your story is very difficult. Narada Uvacha Purusham Puranjanam Vidyad Yad Vyanatyatmanah Puram Ekadvitrichatush Ekadvitrichatushpadam Bahupadamapadakam. That great sage Narada Muni continued, You must understand that Puranjana, the living entity, transmigrates according to his own work into different types of bodies, which can be one-legged, two-legged, three-legged, four-legged, and many-legged, or simply legless. Transmitting into these various types of bodies, the living entity, as the so-called enjoyer, is known as Puranjana. Basically, it's the soul. They're talking about the soul. Yo vignata hrutastasya purushasya sakeshwaraha yenna vignayate pumbhir namabhirva kriya gunaihi. The person I have described as a knower is the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the Master and eternal friend of the living entity. Since the living entities cannot realize the Supreme Personality of Godhead by material names, activities, or qualities, he remains everlastingly unknown to the conditioned soul. Yada jigrukshan purushaha katsnyena prakrutergunan navadvaram dvihastangri tatra manutasadviti. When the living entity wants to enjoy the modes of material nature in their totality, he prefers out of many bodily forms to accept that body which has 9 gates, 2 hands and 2 legs. Thus he prefers to become a human being or a demigod. Buddhim tu pramadham vidyan mamahamiti yatkrutam yamadhishtaya dehesmin puman bhunkte kshabhirgunan. The great sage Narada continued, The word Pramada, mentioned in this regard, refers to the material intelligence or ignorance. It is to understand as such. When one takes shelter of this kind of intelligence, he identifies himself with the material body. Influenced by the material consciousness of I and mine, he begins to enjoy and suffer through his senses. Thus, living entity is entrapped. सकाय इन्द्रियगणा ज्ञानं कर्म च यत्कृतं सख्यस्तद्वृत्तयः प्राणः पञ्चवृत्तिर्यतो रगः. The five working senses and the five senses that acquire knowledge are all male friends of Puranjani. The living entity is assisted by these senses in acquiring knowledge and engaging in activity. The engagements of the senses are known as girlfriends, and the serpent, which was described as having five heads, is the life air acting within the five circulatory processes. बहद्बलं बृहद्बलं मनोविद्यादुभयेन्द्रियनायकं पञ्चालाः पञ्चविषया यन्मध्ये नवकं पुरम्. The 11th attendant, who is the commander of the others, is known as the mind. He is the leader of the senses, both in acquisition of knowledge and in the performance of work. The Panchala kingdom is that atmosphere in which five sense objects are enjoyed. Within that Panchala kingdom is the city of the body, which has 9 gates. Akshini nasike karnau mukham shishna grudaviti shishna gudaviti dve dve dvarau bahiryati yastadindriya samyutah. The eyes, nostrils and the ears are pairs of gates situated in one place. The mouth, genital and rectum are all different gates. Being placed in the body having these 9 gates, the living entity acts externally in the material world and enjoys sense objects like form and taste. Akshini nasike asyam iti panchapurah krutaha dakshina karma uttara chottara smrutaha paschime ityado dvarau gudam sishnamihochyate. 2 eyes, 2 nostrils and a mouth, altogether 5, are situated in the front. The right eye is accepted as the southern gate and the left ear is the northern gate. The 2 holes or gates situated in the west are known as rectum and genital. Swadhyota virmukhi chatra netre ekatra nirmite rupam vibrajitam tabhyam vichaste chakshusheshwaraha. The 2 gates named Kadhyota and Avirmukhi which have been spoken of are the two eyes side by side in one place. The town named Vibrajita should be understood as form. In this way, the two eyes are always engaged in seeing different kinds of forms. Nalini Nalini Nase Gandhas Saurabha Uchyate Grano Vadhyuto Mukyasyam Vipano Vagrasavridrasaha. The two doors named Nalini and Nalini should be known as the two nostrils, and the city named Saurabha represents aroma. The companion spoken of as Avadhuta is the sense of smell. The door called Mukhya is the mouth, and Vipana is the faculty of speech. Rasagna is the sense of taste. The two doors, okay. Apano vyavaharotra chitramadhyo bahudhanam pitruhrurdakshina karna uttaro dvevahu smrutaha. The city called Apana represents engagement of the tongue in speech and Bahudana in the variety of foodstuffs. The right ear is called the gate of Pitruhu, and the left ear is called the gate of Devahu. Pravrittam cha nivruttam cha shastram panchala samgnitam pitruyanam devayanam Kshotrachratadharadvrajet. Narada Muni continued, the city spoken of as the Dakshina Panchala represents the scriptures meant for directing pravriti, the process of sense enjoyment in fruitive activities. The other city named Uttara Panchala represents the scriptures meant for decreasing fruitive activities and increasing knowledge. The living entity receives different kinds of knowledge by means of 2 years, and some living entities are promoted to Pitraloka and some to Devaloka. All this is made possible by the 2 years. Asuri Medramar Vyavayo Graminam Ratihi Upasto Durmadha Prokto Nirrutirghuda Uchyate. The city called Gramaka, which is approached through the lower gate of Asuri, the genital, is meant for sex, which is very pleasing to a common man who are simply fools and rascals. The faculty of procreation is called Durmada and the rectum is called Nivritti. Vaishasam narakam prayur lubdhakon tu te shrunu hastapadau pumam stabhyam yukto yati karoti cha. When it is said that Puranjana goes to Vaisasa, it is meant that he goes to hell. He is accompanied by Lubdhaka, which is the working sense in the rectum. Formerly, I have also spoken of the 2 blind associates. These associates should be understood to be the hands and legs. Being helped by hands and legs, the living entity performs all kinds of work and moves hither and thither. Antah puram cha hrudayam vishuchirmana uchyate tatra moham prasadam va harsham prapnoti tadgunaihi. The word antapura refers to the heart. The word vishusina, meaning going everywhere, indicates the mind. Within the mind, the living entity enjoys the effects of material nature. These effects sometimes cause illusion, sometimes satisfaction, and sometimes jubilation. यथा यथा विक्रियते गुणतो विकरोति वा तथा तयोपद्रष्टात्मा तद्वृत्तिरनुकार्यते. Formerly, it was explained that the queen is one's intelligence. While one is awake or asleep, that intelligence creates different situations. Being influenced by contaminated intelligence, the living entity envisions something and simply imitates the actions and reactions of his intelligence. Deho रतस्त्विन्द्रियाश्वः संवत्सररयो गतिः द्विकर्मचक्रस्त्रिगुणध्वजः पञ्चासु बन्धुरः मनोरशिमर्बुद्धिसूतो हृन्निढो द्वन्द्वकूभरः पञ्चेन्द्रियार्थप्रक्षेपः सप्तधातुवरूतकः आकुतिर्विक्रमो बाह्वो मृगतृष्णां प्रधावति एकादशेन्द्रियचमूः पञ्चसूतानि नोदकृत्. Narada Muni continued, when I referred to as the chariot was in the actual what I referred to as the chariot was in actuality the body. The senses are the horses that pull the chariot. As time passes, year after year, these horses run without obstruction, but in fact they make no progress. Pious and impious activities are the two wheels of the chariot. The three modes of material nature are the chariot's flags. The five types of life air constitute the living entity's bondage, and the mind is controlled to be the rope. Intelligence is the chariot driver. The heart is the sitting place in the chariot, and the dualities of life, such as pleasure and pain, are the knotting place. The seven elements are the coverings of the chariot, and the working senses are the five external processes. The 11 senses are the soldiers. Being engrossed in sense enjoyment, the living entity seated on the chariot hankers after fulfillment of his false desires and runs after sense objects life after life. संवत्सरश्चण्डवेगः कालो येनोपलक्षितः तस्याः नीह गन्धर्वा गन्धर्व्यार्तो रात्रयस्मृताः हरन्त्यायुः परिक्रान्त्या षष्ट्युत्तरशतत्रयम्. What was previously explained as Chandavega, powerful time, is covered by days and nights, named Gandharvas and Gandharvis. The body's lifespan is gradually reduced by the passage of days and nights, which number 360. Kala Kanya Jara Sakshal Lokastam Nabhinandati Swasaram Jagruhe Mrutyuhu Kshayaya Yavaneshwaraha. What was described as Kalakanya should be understood as old age. No one wants to accept old age, but Yavaneshwara, Yavanaraja, who is death, accepts Jara, old age, as his sister. Adharo आधयो व्याधयस्तस्य सैनिका यवनाश्चराः भूतोपसर्गाशुरयः प्रज्वारो द्विविधो ज्वरः एवं बहुविधैर्दुःखैर्दैवभूतात्मसम्भवैः क्लिश्यमानः शतं वर्षं देहे देहीतमोवृतः प्राणेन्द्रियमनोधर्मान् नात्मन्यद्यस्य निर्गुणः शेते कामलवान्ध्यायन् ममाहमिति कर्मकृत्. The followers of Yavaneshwara, Yamaraja, are called the soldiers of death, and they are known as various types of disturbances that pertain to the body and mind. Prajvara represents the two types of fever, extreme heat and extreme cold, typhoid and pneumonia. The living entity lying down within the body is disturbed by many tribulations pertaining to the providence, to other living entities, and to his own body and mind. Despite all kinds of tribulations, the living entity is subjected to the necessities of the body, mind, and senses, and suffering from various types of disease, is carried away by many plans due to his lust to enjoy the world. Although transcendental to the material existence, the living entity, out of ignorance, accepts all these material miseries under the pretext of false egoism, I and mine. In this way, he lives for 100 years within this body. यदात्मानमविज्ञाय भगवन्तं परं गुरुं पुरुषस्तु विषञ्जेत गुणेषु प्रकृते स्वदृक् गुणाभिमानी स तदा कर्माणि कुरुते वशः शुक्लं कृष्णं लोहितं वा यथा कर्माभिजायते. The living entity by nature has minute independence to choose his own good or bad fortune, but when he forgets his supreme master, the personality of Godhead, he gives himself up unto the modes of material nature. Being influenced by the modes of material nature, he identifies himself with the body, and for the interest of the body becomes attached to various activities. Sometimes he is under the influence of the mode of ignorance, sometimes the mode of passion, and sometimes the mode of goodness. The living entity thus gets different types of bodies under the modes of material nature. Shuklat prakashabhuyishtallokanapnoti karhichit dukhodarkan kriyayasamstat dukhodarkan kriyayasamstamah tamah shokotkataan kvachit. Those who are situated in the mode of goodness act piously according to the Vedic injunctions. Thus they are elevated to the higher planetary systems where the demigods live. Those who are influenced by mode of passion engage in various types of productive activities in the planetary systems where human beings live. Similarly, those influenced by the mode of darkness are subjected to various types of misery and live in the animal kingdom. क्वचित् पुमान् क्वचिच्च स्त्री क्वचिन्नो भयमन्धधीः देवो मनुष्यस्तिर्यग्वा यथा कर्मगुणं भवः. शुक्लात् प्रकाशभूयिष्ठां लोकानाप्नोति कर्हिचित् दुःखोदर्खान् क्रियायासां स्तमक्षोकोत्कटान् क्वचित्. This is repetition. Those who are situated in the mode of goodness act piously according to the Vedic injunctions. Thus, they are elevated to the higher planetary systems where the demigods live. Those who are influenced by the mode of passion engage in various types of productive activities in the planetary systems where human beings live. Similarly, those influenced by the mode of darkness are subjected to various types of misery and live in the animal kingdom. Kvachit puman क्वचिच्चत्री क्वचिन्नो भयमन्धधीः देवो मनुष्यस्तिर्यग्वा यथा कर्मगुणं भवः. Covered by the mode of ignorance in material nature, the living entity is sometimes a male, sometimes a female, sometimes an inansh, sometimes a human being, sometimes a demigod, sometimes a bird, an animal, and so on. In this way, he is wandering within the material world. His acceptance of different types of bodies is brought about by his activities under the influence of the modes of nature. Shutparito yata dhinaha sayameyo gruham charan vindati yadrishtam dandamodanamev va yata kamashayo jiva uccavacha patha brahman uparyadho va madhyeva yati drishtim priya priyam. The living entity is exactly like a dog who, overcome with hunger, goes from door to door for some food. According to his destiny, he sometimes receives punishment and is driven out, and at other times receives a little food to eat. Similarly, the living entity, being influenced by so many desires, wanders in different species of life according to destiny. Sometimes he is high and sometimes he is low. Sometimes he goes to the heavenly planets and sometimes to hell, sometimes to the middle planets, and so on. दुःखेष्वेकतरेणापि दैवभूतात्महेतुषु जीवस्य न व्यवच्छेदः स्याच्चेतत्तत्प्रतिक्रिया. The living entities are trying to counteract different miserable conditions pertaining to providence, other living entities, or the body and the mind. Still, they may remain conditioned by the laws of nature despite all attempts to counter these laws. यथा हि पुरुषो भारं शिरसा गुरुमुद्वहन् तं स्कन्धे तं स्कन्देन स आधत्ते तथा सर्वाः प्रतिक्रियाः. A man may carry a burden on his head, and it is when he feels it to be too heavy, he sometimes gives relief to his head by putting the burden on his shoulder. In this way, he tries to relieve himself of the burden. However, whatever process he devises to counteract the burden does nothing more than put the same burden from one place to another. नैकान्ततः प्रतीकारः नैकान्ततः प्रतीकारः कर्मणां कर्म केवलं द्वयं ह्यविद्योपसृतं स्वप्ने स्वप्न इवानघ. Narada continued, O you who are free from all sinful activity, no one can counteract the effects of fruitive activity simply by manufacturing a different activity devoid of Krishna consciousness. All such activity is due to our ignorance. When we have a troublesome dream, we cannot relieve it with a troublesome hallucination. One can counteract a dream only by awakening. Similarly, our material existence is due to our ignorance and illusion. Unless we awaken to Krishna consciousness, we cannot be relieved of such dreams. For the ultimate solution to all problems, we must awaken Krishna consciousness. अर्थे ह्यविद्यमानेऽपि संसृतिर्न निवर्तते मनसा लिङ्गरूपेण स्वप्ने विचरतो यथा. Sometimes we suffer because we see a tiger in a dream or a snake in a vision, but actually there's neither a tiger nor a snake. Thus we create some situation in a subtle form and suffer the consequences. These sufferings cannot be mitigated unless we are awakened from our dream. अतात्मनोऽर्थभूतस्य यतो नर्तपरम्परा संसृतिस्तद्व्यवच्छेदो भक्त्या परमया गुरौ वासुदेवे भगवती भक्तियोगः समाहितः सग्रीचीनेन वैराग्यं ज्ञानं च जनयिष्यति. The real interest of the living entity is to get out of nescience that causes him to endure repeated birth and death. The only remedy is to surrender unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead through his representative. Unless one renders devotional service unto the Supreme Personality of Godhead, Vasudeva, one cannot possibly become completely detached from this material world, nor can he possibly manifest real knowledge. सोचिरादेव राजर्षे स्यादच्युतकथाश्रयः शृण्वतः श्रद्धधानस्य नित्यदा स्यादधीयतः नित्यधास्तादधीयतः. O best of the kings, one who is faithful, who is always hearing the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, who is always engaged in the culture of Krishna consciousness and in hearing of the Lord's activities, very soon become eligible to see the Supreme Personality of Godhead face to face. यत्र भागवता राजन् साधवो विशदाशयाः भगवद्गुणानुकतनश्रवणाव्यग्रचेतसः तस्मिन्महन्मुखरिता मधुभिच्चरित्र पीयूषशोषसरितः परितस्रवन्ति ताये पिबन्त्यवितृषो नृपगाढकर्णैस्तान्न स्पृशान्त्यशन तृढभयशोकमोहाः. My dear king, in the place where pure devotees live, following the rules and regulations, and thus purely conscious and engaged with great eagerness in hearing and chanting the glories of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, in that place, if one gets a chance to hear their constant flow of nectar, which is exactly like the waves of a river, one will forget the necessities of life, namely hunger and thirst, and become immune to all kinds of fear, lamentation, and illusion. एतैरुपधृतो नित्यं जीवलोकः स्वभावजैः न करोति हरेर्नूनं कथामृतनिधौ रतिम्. Because the conditioned soul is always disturbed by the bodily necessities such as hunger and thirst, he has very little time to cultivate attachment to hearing the nectarine words of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Prajapatipatis sakshat Bhagavan Girisho Manuhu Dakshadhayaf Prajadhyaksha Naishtikāsanakādayah Marīchiratrangirasau Pulastyah Pulaha Kratuhu Bhrugurvasishta Ityete Madanta Brahmavadinaha Adhyapi Vachaspatayas Tapo Vidya Samadhibihi Pashyantopi na pashyanti Pashyantam Parameshwaram. The most powerful Lord Brahma, the father of all progenitors, Lord Shiva, Manu, Daksha, and other rulers of humankind, the four saintly first-class brahmacharis headed by Sanaka and Sanatana, the great sages Marichi, Atri, Angira, Pulastya, Pulaha, Kratu, Bhrugu, and Vashishta, and my humble self Narada are all stalwart brahmanas who can speak authoritatively on Vedic literature. We are very powerful because of austerities, meditation, and education. Nonetheless, even after inquiring about the Supreme Personality of Godhead, whom we always see, we do not know perfectly about him. शब्दब्रह्मणि दुष्पारे चरन्त उरुविस्तरे मन्त्रलिङ्गैर्व्यवच्छिन्नं भजन्तो न विदुः परम्. Despite the cultivation of Vedic knowledge, which is unlimited, and the worship of different demigods by the symptoms of Vedic mantras, demigod worship does not help one to understand the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Yada yasyānugruhnāti Bhagavan Atmabhavitah sajahati matim loke Vede cha parinishtitam. When a person is fully engaged in devotional service, he is favored by the Lord, who bestows his causeless mercy. At such a time, the awakened devotee gives up all material activities and ritualistic performances mentioned in the Vedas. तस्मात् कर्मसु बर्हिष्मन् न्यज्ञानादर्थकाशिषु सार्थदृष्टिं कृताः क्षेत्रस्पर्शिष्वस्पुष्टवस्तुषु. My dear Lord Bharhishman, you should never, out of ignorance, take to the Vedic rituals or a fruitive activity which may be pleasing to hear about or which may appear to be the goal of self-interest. You should never take these to be the ultimate goal of life. Swam lokam na viduste vai yatra devo janardanaha ahurdhrumradhiyo vedam sakarmakama tadvidaha. Those who are less intelligent accept the Vedic ritualistic ceremonies as all in all. They do not know that the purpose of the Vedas is to understand one's own home, where Supreme Personality of Godhead lives. Not being interested in their real home, they are illusioned and search for other homes. Astirya dharmaih pragagraihi katsnena kshiti mandalam shabdo bruhadvadhanmani karmana vaishi yatparam tatkarma haritosham yat tat sa vidya tanmatiryata. My dear king, the entire world is covered with the sharp points of kusha grass, and on the strength of this you have become proud because you have killed various types of animals in sacrifice. Because of your foolishness, you did not know that the devotional service is the only way one can please the Supreme Personality of Godhead. You cannot understand this fact. Your only activities should be those that can please the Personality of Godhead. Your education should be such that we can become elevated to Krishna consciousness. Harir deha bhrutamatma swayam prakrutirishvaraha tatpadamulam sharanam yataha kshemo nrunamiha. Sri Hari, the Supreme Personality of Godhead, is the super soul and the guide of all living entities who have accepted material bodies within this world. He is the supreme controller of all material activities in material nature. He is also our best friend, and everyone should take shelter at his lotus feet. In doing so, one's life will be auspicious. स वै प्रियतमश्चात्मा यतो न भयमन्वपि इति वेद स वै विद्वान् यो विद्वान् स गुरुर्हरिः. One who is engaged in devotional service has not the least fear in material existence. This is because the Supreme Personality of Godhead is the super soul and friend of everyone. One who knows this secret is actually educated, and one thus educated can become the spiritual master of the world. One who is actually bona fide spiritual master, representative of Krishna, is not different from Krishna. Narada Uvacha प्रश्न एवं हि संचिन्नो भवतः पुरुषर्षभ अत्र मे वदतो गुह्यं निशामय सुनिश्चितम्. The great saint Narada continued, O great personality, I have replied properly about all that you have asked me. Now hear another narration that is accepted by saintly persons and is very confidential. Shrudrancharam sumanasam sharane mititva raktam shadan shrighanasamasu lubdhakarnam agre vrukana Sutrupo viganya yantam prushte mrugaya lubdaka bana bhinnam. My dear king, please search out the deer who is engaged in eating grass in a very nice flower garden along with his wife. That deer is very much attached to his business and he is enjoying the sweet singing of the bumblebees in that garden. Just try to understand his position. He is unaware that before him is a tiger which is accustomed to living at the cost of another's flesh. Behind that deer is a hunter who is threatened to pierce him with a sharp arrow, with sharp arrows. Thus the deer's death is imminent. सुमनः समधर्मणां स्त्रीणां शरण आश्रमे पुष्पमद्युगन्धवत् क्षुद्रतमं काम्यकर्म विपाकजं काम सुमनः समधर्मणां स्त्रीणां शरण आश्रमे पुष्पमद्युगन्धवत् क्षुद्रतमं काम्यकर्म विपाकजं काम सुखलवम् जैष्वयोपस्त्याधि विचिन्वन्तं मिथुनीभूय तदभिनिवेशितमनसं षडङ्गि गणसामगीत वदति मनोहर वनिताधिजला मनोहर वनितादिजनालापेष्वतितरामतिप्रलोभितर्कणम् अग्रे वृकयूत वधात्मन आयुर्हरतो होरात्रान्तान् काल लवविशेषान् विघायण्यगृहेषु विहरन्तं पृष्ठत एव परोक्षमनुप्रवृत्तो लुब्धकः कृतान्तोऽन्तः क्षणेन यमिह पराविद्याति तमि ममात्मानमहो राजन् भिन्नहृदयं द्रष्टुमर्हसीति. My dear king, woman who is very attractive in the beginning but in the end very disturbing is exactly like a flower which is attractive in the beginning and detestable at the end. With woman, the living entity is entangled with lusty desires and he enjoys sex just as one enjoys the aroma of a flower. He thus enjoys a life of sense gratification from his tongue to his genitals, and in this way, the living entity considers himself very happy in family life. United with his wife, he always remains absorbed in such thoughts. He feels great pleasure in hearing the talks of his wife and children, which are like the sweet humming of the bumblebees that collect honey from flower to flower. He forgets that before him is time, which is taking away his lifespan with the passing of day and night. He does not see the gradual diminishing of his life, nor does he care about the superintendent of death, who is trying to kill him from behind. Just try to understand this. You are in the precarious position and are threatened from all sides. Sattvam vichakshya mrugacheštitamatmanontaschittam niyaccha hrudi karma घृणीं च चित्ते जह्यङ्गनाश्रममसत्तमयूतघातं प्रीणीहि हंसशरणं विरमक्रमेण. My dear king, just try to understand the allegorical position of the deer. Be fully conscious of yourself and give up the pleasure of hearing about promotion to heavenly planets by fruitive activity. Give up household life which is full of sex as well as stories about such things, and take shelter of the Supreme Personality of Godhead through the mercy of liberated souls. In this way, please give up your attraction for material existence. राजोवाच श्रुतमन्वीक्षितं ब्रह्मन् भगवान् यदभाषत नैतञ्जानन्त्युपाध्यायाः किं न ब्रूयुर्विधुर्यधि. The king replied, My dear Brahmana, whatever you have said, I have heard with great attention, and considering all of it, have come to the conclusion that the acharyas, teachers, who engaged me in fruitive activity did not know this confidential knowledge. If they were aware of it, why did they not explain it to me? Samshayotra tu te vipra samchinnastat-kruto mahan ऋषयोऽपि हि मुह्यन्ति यत्र नेन्द्रियवृत्तयः. My dear Brahmana, there are contradictions between your instructions and those of my spiritual teachers who engaged me in fruitive activities. I now can understand the distinction between devotional service, knowledge, and renunciation. I had some doubts about them, but you have now very kindly dissipated all these doubts. I can now understand how even the great sages are bewildered by the real purpose of life. Of course, there is no question of sense gratification. कर्माण्यरभते येन पुमानिह विहायतम् अमुत्रान्येन देहेन जुष्टानि स यदश्नुते. The results of whatever a living entity does in this life are enjoyed in the next life. इति वेदविदां वादः श्रूयते तत्र तत्रः कर्म यत्क्रियते प्रोक्तं परोक्षं न प्रकाशते. The expert knowers of the Vedic conclusions say that one enjoys or suffers the results of his past activities. But practically it is seen that the body that performed the work in its last birth is already lost. So how is it possible to enjoy or suffer the reactions of that work in a different body? Narada uvacha yenaivarabhate karma tenaivamutra tatpuman bhunkte hyavyavadhanena lingena manasa swayam. The great sage Narada continued, the living entity acts in a gross body in this life. This body is forced to act by the subtle body, composed of mind, intelligence, and ego. After the gross body is lost, the subtle body is still there to enjoy or suffer. Thus, there is no change. Yana Shayana Mima Mutsrujya Shwasantam Purusho Yata Karmatmanyahitam Bhunkte Tadrushe Netarenava. The living entity, while dreaming, gives up the actual living body. Through the activities of his mind, the intelligence, he acts in another body, either as a god or a dog. After giving up his gross body, the living entity enters either an animal body or a demigod's body on this planet or another planet. Thus, he enjoys the results of the actions of his past life. Mamaite manasa yadyadasa asavahamiti bruvan gruhniya tatpuman radham karma yena punarbhavaha. The living entity labors under the bodily conception of I am this, I am that. My duty is this and therefore I shall do it. These are all mental impressions and all these activities are temporary. Nonetheless, by the grace of the Supreme Personality of Godhead, the living entity gets a chance to execute all his mental concoctions. Thus he gets another body. Yata numiyate chittam ubhayairindriye hitaihi evam pragdehajam karma lakshyate chitta vrittibhihi. One can understand the mental or conscious position of a living entity by the activities of two kinds of senses, the knowledge acquiring senses and the executive senses. Similarly, by the mental condition or consciousness of a person, one can understand his position in the previous life. Nanubhutam kvachanena dehena drushtam ashrutam kadachidupalabhyeta yadrupam yadrugatmani. Sometimes we suddenly experience something that was never experienced in the present body by sight or hearings. Sometimes we see such things suddenly in dreams. तेनास्य तादृशं राजालिङ्गिनो देह सम्भवं श्रद्धत्स्वाननुभूतो भूतोऽर्थो न मनः sprashtumarhati. Therefore, my dear king, the living entity who has a subtle mental covering develops all kinds of thoughts and images because of his previous body. Take this from me as certain. There is no possibility of concocting anything mentally without having perceived it in the previous body. मन एव मनुष्यस्य पूर्वरूपाणि शंसति भविष्यतश्च भद्रं ते तथैव न भविष्यतः. O king, all good fortune unto you. The mind is the cause of the living entities attaining a certain type of body in accordance with his association with material nature. According to one's mental composition, one can understand what the living entity was in his past life as well as what kind of body he will have in the future. Thus, the mind indicates the past and future bodies. अदृष्टमश्रुतं चात्र क्वचिन्मनसि दृश्यते यथा तथानुमन्तव्यं देशकालक्रियाश्रयम्. Sometimes in a dream we see something never experienced or heard of in this life, but all these incidents have been experienced at different times in different places and in different conditions. सर्वे क्रमानुरोधेन मनसीन्द्रियगोचराः आयान्ति बहुशो यान्ति सर्वे समनसो जनाः. The mind of the living entity continues to exist in various gross bodies, and according to one's desire for sense gratification, the mind records different thoughts. In the mind, these appear together in different combinations. Therefore, these images sometimes appear as things never seen or never heard before. Sattvaikanište manasi bhagavat parshvavartini tamaschandramasi vedam uparajyavabhasate. Krishna consciousness means constantly associating with the Supreme Personality of Godhead in such a mental state that the devotee can observe the cosmic manifestation exactly as the Supreme Personality of Godhead does. Such observation is not always possible because it becomes manifest exactly like the dark planet known as Rahu, who is observed in the presence of the full moon. नाहं ममेति भावोऽयं पुरुषे व्यवधीयते यावद्बुद्धिमनोक्षार्थ गुणव्यूहो ह्यनादिमान्. As long as there exists a subtle material body composed of intelligence, mind, senses, sense objects, and the reactions of the material qualities, the consciousness of false identification and its relative objective, the gross body, exist as well. Suptimurchopatapeshu pranayana vighatataha nehatehamiti jnanam mrutyuprajwarayorapi. When the living entity is in deep sleep, when he faints, when there is great when there is some great shock on account of severe loss, at the time of death, or when the body temperature is very high, the movement of the life air is arrested. At that time, the living entity loses knowledge of identifying the body with the self. गर्भे बाल्येऽप्यपौष्कल्याद्देहदाशविधं तदा लिङ्गनः दृश्यते यूनः कुह्वां चन्द्रमसो यथा. When one is youth, all the 10 senses and the mind are completely visible. However, in the mother's womb or in the boyhood state, the sense organs and the mind remain covered, just as the full moon is covered by the darkness of the dark moon night. अर्ते ह्यविद्यमानेऽपि संसृतिर्न निवर्तते ध्यायतो विषयानस्य स्वप्नेनर्तागमो यथा. When the living entity dreams, the sense objects are not actually present. However, because one has associated with the sense objects, they become manifest. Similarly, the living entity with undeveloped senses does not cease to exist materially, even though he may not be exactly in contact with the sense objects. एवं पञ्चविधं लिङ्गं त्रिवृत्तषोडशविस्तृतं येष चेतनया युक्तो जीव इत्यभिधीयते. The 5 sense objects, the 5 sense organs, the 5 knowledge acquiring senses, and the mind are the 16 material expansions. These combinations with the living entity and these combine with the living entity and are influenced by the 3 modes of material nature. Thus, the existence of the conditioned soul is understood. Anena purusho dehan upadatte vimunchati harsham shokam bhayam dukkham sukham chanena vindati. By virtue of the processes of the subtle body, the living entity develops and gives up gross bodies. This is known as the transmission of the soul. Thus, the soul becomes subjected to different types of the so-called enjoyment, lamentation, fear, happiness, and unhappiness. Yata trunajalookeyam napayatyapayati cha natyajen नत्यजेन्म्रियमाणोऽपि प्राग्देहाभिमतिं जनः यावदन्यं न विन्देत व्यवधानेन कर्मणां मन एव मनुष्येन्द्र भूतानां भवभावनम्. The caterpillar transports itself from one leaf to another by capturing one leaf before giving up the other. Similarly, according to his previous work, the living entity must capture another body before giving up the one he has. This is because the mind is the reservoir of all kinds of desires. यदाक्षैश्चरितान् ध्यायन् कर्माण्यचिनुते सकृत् सति कर्मण्यविद्यायां बन्धः कर्मण्यनात्मनः. As long as we desire to enjoy sense gratification, we create material activities. When the living entity acts in the material field, he enjoys the senses, and while enjoying the senses, he creates another series of material activities. In this way, the living entity becomes entrapped as a conditioned soul. अतस्तदपवादार्थं भज सर्वात्मना हरिं पश्यंस्तदात्मकं विश्वं स्थित्युत्पत्त्यययायतः स्थित्युत्पत्त्यप्ययायतः. You should always know that this cosmic manifestation is created, maintained, and annihilated by the will of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, everything within this cosmic manifestation is under the control of the Lord. To be enlightened to this perfect knowledge, one should always engage himself in the devotional service of the Lord. Maitreya Uvacha Bhagavata Bhagavan Narado Hamsayorgatim Pradhashya Hyamuma Mantriya Siddhalokam Tato Gatam. The great sage Maitreya continued, the supreme devotee, the great saint Narada, thus explained to King Prachinabarhi the constitutional position of the Supreme Personality of Godhead and the living entity. After giving an invitation to the king, Narada Muni left to Siddhaloka. Prachinabarhi Rajarshihi Prajasarghabhirakshane Adishya Putra Nagamat Tapase Kapilashramam. In the presence of his ministers, the saintly king Prachinabarhi left orders for his sons to protect the citizens. He then left home and went off to undergo austerities in the holy place known as Kapilashrama. Tatraikagramanadhiro Govindacharnambujam Vimuktasango Nubhajan Bhaktya Tatsabhyatamagat. Having undergone austerities and penances at Kapilashrama, King Prachinabarhi attained full liberation from all material designations. He constantly engaged in the transcendental loving service of the Lord and attained a spiritual position qualitatively equal to that of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. एतदध्यात्मपारोक्ष्यं गीतं देवर्षि नारद यः श्रावयेद्यः शृणुयात् सलिङ्गेन vimuchyate. My dear Vidura, one who hears this narration concerning the understanding of the living entity's spiritual existence as described by the great sage Narada, or who relates it to others, will be liberated from the bodily conception of life. This is the reason I do all this recording, so that people can understand what is in Shrimad Bhagavatam. Ye tan mukunda yashasa bhuvanam punanam devarshi varya mukanihi shrutam shaucham yah kirtyamanamadigaccati parameshtyam nasmin bhave भ्रमति मुक्त समस्त बंधः. This narration spoken by the great sage Narada is full of transcendental fame of the Supreme Personality of Godhead. Consequently, this narration, when described, certainly sanctifies this material world. It purifies the heart of the living entity and helps him attain this spiritual identity. One who relates this transcendental narration will be liberated from all material bondage and will no longer have to wander within this material world. Adhyatma parokshyamidam mayadigatam adbhutam एवं स्त्रियाश्रमः पुंसश्चिन्नो मुत्र च संशयः. The allegory of King Puranjana, described herein according to the authority, was heard by me from my spiritual master, and it is full of spiritual knowledge. If one can understand the purpose of this allegory, he will certainly be relieved from the bodily conception and will clearly understand life after death. Although one may not understand what transmigration of the soul actually is, one can fully understand it by studying this narration. So there are two slokas without Sanskrit but just the meaning. So I'm going to try to read this. This is not in Sanskrit, so I'm going to read off in English. सर्वेषां येव जन्तूनां सततं देहपोषणे अस्ति प्रज्ञसमयत्ता को विशेषस्तदा नृणं लब्धवेहन्ते मनुष्यत्वं हित्वा देहद्यसद्ग्रहम् आत्मस्तृत्य विहायेदं जीवात्मा स विविष्यते. A desire to maintain body, wife, children is also observed in animal society. The animals have full intelligence to manage such affairs. If a human being is simply advanced in this respect, what is the difference between him and an animal? One should be very careful to understand that this human life is attained after many births in evolutionary process. A learned man who gives up the bodily conception of life, both gross and subtle, will, by the entitlement of spiritual knowledge, become a prominent individual spirit, as the Supreme Lord is also. Bhaktihi Krishne daya jiveshva vakunta jnanam atmani yadi syad atmano bhuyad apavargastu samstretaha. If a living entity is developed in Krishna consciousness and is merciful to others, and if his spiritual knowledge of self-realization is perfect, he will immediately attain liberation from the bondage of material existence. Adrushtam drushtavannankshed bhutam swapnavad anyatha bhutam bhuvad bhavishyatcha suptam sarvarahoraha. Everything happening within time, which consists of past, present and future, is merely a dream. This is the secret understanding in all Vedic literature. Thus ends the chapter entitled Talks between Narada and Prachina Barhi. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare. Hare Rama, Rama Rama, Hare Hare. Hare Krishna, Krishna Krishna, Hare Hare.